Can't sleep? Good, because this isn't bedtime history. This is no sleep historian, where the past comes alive when the world shuts down. When the lights go out, the secrets crawl in. We dig through the forgotten, the forbidden, and the downright disturbing. Lost empires, cursed relics, real conspiracies. The kind of stories that keep the night from being quiet. So, if you're still awake, you're in the right place. History doesn't rest, and neither do we. Subscribe, and let's uncover what was never meant to be remembered. Tonight's topic: the forgotten empire of pirates. A true story buried by time. Section 1. A world without a crown. History is often written by the victors. It glorifies empires, sanctifies monarchies, and paints rebellion as chaos. But sometimes, the truth doesn't survive the retelling. Sometimes, entire movements vanish under centuries of dust, dismissed as legend or caricature. That's the case with what could only be described as the world's first anarchist naval republic, the forgotten empire of pirates. We know the image well: the black flag, the snarling bearded men, the treasure maps, and parrots and rum. But beneath the pop culture is a story far stranger and far more dangerous. For a brief window in the early 18th century, a sprawling pirate confederation challenged the largest empires on Earth, not just with muskets and cannons, but with ideas. They created their own form of democracy. They broke racial and class barriers. They defied kings and questioned the legitimacy of empire. And they did it from the decks of stolen ships, in hidden coves, and under their own lawless code. This isn't fiction. This is historical fact. From the burned-out remains of Spanish colonies to the turquoise waters of Nassau, from the Red Sea to the Carolinas, pirates built a transnational rebellion. They raided merchant vessels not only for gold, but for vengeance. They formed governments at sea, courts among thieves, and a justice system that sometimes offered more equality than the land-based powers they attacked. These weren't mindless cutthroats. Many were veterans of imperial wars, former slaves, escaped convicts, and political exiles. Some could read 4 languages. Some were women who disguised themselves as men. All were outcasts who had nothing to lose and everything to gain. And they almost got away with it. This is the story of the pirate empire you were never taught. This is the true history of a world that nearly changed course, told not through romantic fables or children's stories, but through the bloody, brilliant, and buried facts of one of the boldest rebellions the world has ever known. Section 2. The Age of Opportunity and Oppression. To understand the explosion of piracy in the early 18th century, you have to look at what the world looked like coming out of the 1600s. Europe was drunk on expansion. For great powers Britain, France, Spain, and the Dutch Republic were slicing up the world like a bloody pie. Colonies in the Americas, Africa, and Asia fed resources back to Europe in a triangular trade that included everything from gold and silver to human beings. The seas were highways of imperial greed. Galleons and merchant ships carried unimaginable wealth across the oceans. But the more ships there were, the more fragile the system became. Every war disrupted trade. Every political upheaval weakened navies. And with each peace treaty, thousands of sailors were dumped from service-trained, armed, and broke. This surplus of skilled seamen had few options. Some turned to fishing, many died, but others, especially in the Caribbean, turned to piracy. And they didn't start from scratch. The tools of empire ships, weapons, maps were already in their hands. They knew how to fight. They knew the trade routes. And more importantly, they had nothing to lose. The golden age of piracy didn't spring from madness. It came from empire's failure to care for its own. Pirate crews formed democracies because they had seen the brutality of monarchies. They shared loot because they had been robbed by their commanders. They gave every man a vote because they had been denied one on land. And in places like the Caribbean, conditions made piracy almost inevitable. The islands were sparsely defended. Corrupt governors turned blind eyes. Merchants secretly traded with pirates to avoid imperial taxes. And the geography, full of hidden bays, shallow harbors, and narrow straits, was perfect for ambushes and escapes. By the late 1600s, piracy wasn't a nuisance. It was an ecosystem. Former privateers like Henry Morgan had already blurred the lines. Morgan, who once sacked Panama with British approval, was later knighted and made governor of Jamaica. But others took his tactics and ran with them without the crown's permission. One key group were the Brethren of the Coast, a loose fraternity of pirates and privateers who operated out of places like Tortuga and Port Royal. They were ruthless, yes, but they were also organized. They passed around intelligence. They shared resources, and they saw themselves, in some strange way, as a counterbalance to imperial tyranny. All of this would coalesce in the early 1700s in one place, one port that became the capital of pirate resistance: Nassau. Section 3. Nassau and the Pirate Republic. If you were to stand on the white sands of Nassau today, you'd see a tourist-friendly harbor dotted with cruise ships and duty-free stores. But 300 years ago, Nassau was something very different. It was a hive of scum, rebellion, and strategic brilliance. New Providence Island had once been a British colony, but by 1706 it had all but collapsed. French and Spanish attacks had driven out the official governor. The fortifications were in ruins. There was no navy, no laws, no taxes. And into this power vacuum flooded pirates. At its peak, Nassau hosted over 1,000 pirates, more than the total population of most other British colonies in the region. These weren't just misfits. They were former naval officers, privateers disillusioned with British politics, and runaway slaves who saw freedom only in lawless waters. Nassau became more than a hideout. It became a functioning pirate society. Ships were repaired and resupplied there. Loot was divided under agreed-upon articles of agreement. Early pirate constitutions that outlined everything from chain of command to compensation for lost limbs. Captains were elected and could be deposed. Food and drink were communal. Even discipline was enforced, often through a jury of crewmates. And crucially, race and nationality were often ignored. Black and white pirates worked side by side. Enslaved men who joined crews were often granted freedom. Many pirate ships were among the most integrated spaces of the era, something unthinkable in British or Spanish colonies. One of the most important figures in this era was Benjamin Hornigold, a British privateer who turned to piracy around 1713. Hornigold, along with his protege Edward Teachlater, known as Blackbeard, dominated the Bahamas and the southeastern American coast. Their reach was so vast that colonial governors were forced to write directly to the crown for help. Nassau became known as the Pirate Republic, and while it was never a formal government, it operated like a confederation. Crews from different ships cooperated on raids. They shared intelligence about naval movements. They negotiated disputes. And when ships returned to port, they poured their riches into the local economy, buying goods, alcohol, weapons, and favors. Other famous pirates joined in: Charles Vane, known for his cruelty; Calico Jack Rackham, whose flamboyant clothes and love affairs made him infamous; Mary Read and Anne Bonny, two women who disguised themselves as men and fought with fury. Together, they made Nassau the beating heart of anti-imperial rebellion. But the Golden Age couldn't last. Empires had begun to notice, and they were ready to strike back. By 1715, the pirate republic had reached critical mass. Its raiders were not just a nuisance. They were destabilizing entire colonial economies. British, Spanish, and French shipping lanes were no longer secure. Insurance costs skyrocketed. Merchants lobbied their governments for action. Governors wrote desperate letters begging for ships and troops. The pirates, emboldened by their success, grew more daring. They struck as far north as New York and as far south as Brazil. They didn't just loot, they sent a message. The sea belonged to no king, but empires do not take rebellion lightly. In 1717, King George I issued the Act of Grace, offering a full pardon to any pirate who surrendered within a year. It was a calculated move. The British Crown hoped to divide the pirates, tempting the less committed back to civility while isolating the hardcore radicals. And for some, it worked. Benjamin Hornigold accepted the pardon and switched sides, eventually hunting his former allies. Others, like Charles Vane, spit in the face of clemency and doubled down. The British followed the carrot with the stick. They dispatched a ruthless governor named Woodes Rogers to the Bahamas. A former privateer himself, Rogers was tasked with destroying the pirate republic. He arrived in Nassau in 1718 with a fleet of warships, a royal commission, and no tolerance for negotiation. His orders were clear: restore order by diplomacy or by force. The confrontation was swift. Vane fled Nassau rather than face Rogers' navy. Others, like Rackham, scattered. Some turned informant. Rogers imposed martial law, rebuilt the island's defenses, and offered pardons to those who swore loyalty. But behind the bureaucracy was an iron fist. Pirate leaders were hunted, captured, and publicly executed. The beaches of Nassau, once a haven, became gallows. But even as Nassau fell, piracy flared elsewhere. Edward Teach, Blackbeard himself, retreated to the American colonies. He set up a blockade of Charleston, South Carolina in 1718, demanding medicine and supplies in exchange for the hostages he held. It was an audacious move, bold, terrifying, and effective. Teach was no mere thug. He was a tactician. His ship, the Queen Anne's Revenge, was a former French slaver, outfitted with 40 guns. He cultivated a fearsome persona, lighting fuses in his beard before battle to appear as a smoke-wreathed demon. But off the battlefield, he was charismatic, a skilled negotiator, and politically savvy. Blackbeard knew the colonies were not unified. Governors competed for influence. Enforcement was spotty. Corruption was rampant. He struck deals with colonial officials, married a local woman, and played the legal system to buy time. For months, he operated in a gray zone between outlaw and insider, but eventually the British government lost patience. Virginia's governor, Alexander Spotswood, took matters into his own hands. In late 1718, he sent a naval force under Lieutenant Robert Maynard to kill Blackbeard without consulting North Carolina's jurisdiction. It was a controversial and extra-legal move, but effective. Maynard's men caught up with Blackbeard near Ocracoke Island. What followed was one of the bloodiest single battles in pirate history. The fighting was hand-to-hand. Blackbeard took 5 bullets and more than 20 sword cuts before he finally fell. His head was cut off and hung from the bow of Maynard's ship as proof. The death of Blackbeard sent shockwaves through the pirate world. He had been a symbol of freedom, terror, and defiance. His fall marked a turning point. Pirates now realized the empires were not just reacting, they were declaring war, and the noose kept tightening. Section 5. The Slow Death of a Republic. After Nassau was retaken and Blackbeard was killed, the pirate network began to unravel. The empires had finally coordinated their response. Naval patrols increased. Governors were given broader powers. New laws made it easier to execute captured pirates. The Atlantic became less of a frontier and more of a trap. The pirates who remained were either desperate or defiant. Charles Vane continued raiding, but alienated his crew with his brutality and refusal to retreat. Eventually, he was captured, tried, and hanged in 1721. Jack Rackham, known more for his style than success, was captured in 1720. He and his lover, Anne Bonny, were tried in Jamaica. Rackham was hanged, his body displayed in a gibbet as a warning. Mary Read, who had fought alongside Bonny, reportedly died in prison of fever. Anne Bonny's fate remains unclear. Some sources claim she was released due to family connections. Others suggest she escaped and lived under a false name. One by one, the legends fell. But it wasn't just the executions that killed the pirate dream. The world changed. Peace returned to Europe, which meant fewer unemployed sailors. Colonies became more organized, more fortified, and less corruptible. Merchant ships were better armed. Insurance companies developed protocols for pirate risk, and new trade routes, especially those around the Cape of Good Hope, shifted the centers of wealth away from traditional pirate hunting grounds. Piracy didn't vanish overnight. It faded like smoke from a cannon. By 1730, the Golden Age was over. The pirate republic was a memory, its leaders dead or disappeared, its ideals crushed by the machine of empire. Section 6. What the pirates left behind. History tried to bury the pirates. For a time, it succeeded. They were dismissed as criminals, psychopaths, and simple thugs. Their politics were erased, their motives reduced to greed, their names turned into cartoons. But something survived. The pirates of the 18th century weren't just rebels. They were early challengers to global capitalism. They created a form of democracy at sea long before the American Revolution. They offered racial and gender integration in a time of slavery and patriarchy. They practiced communal wealth sharing and even rudimentary disability compensation for wounded crew members. And they did all this without kings, constitutions, or parliaments. The Articles of Agreement signed by pirate crews functioned like constitutions. They outlined rules, rights, and responsibilities. Most gave every crewman an equal vote in major decisions. Many forbade gambling or drunken violence. Some set aside compensation for those injured or killed. In an era where navies paid sailors poorly and beat them regularly, pirates offered dignity. Even their flags were symbolic. The Jolly Roger wasn't just to intimidate. It was a statement of identity, a declaration that the wearer was beyond the reach of empire, that they did not acknowledge any national flag. Some modern scholars view the pirates as proto-anarchists. Others see them as failed revolutionaries. But there is no doubt that their existence threatened the systems of the time. The British understood this. That's why they didn't just kill pirates, they erased them. They turned them into fairy tales. They stripped away the politics, the diversity, the radicalism. They made them Halloween costumes. But in recent decades, historians have begun to recover the truth. Records from colonial courts, letters from governors, diaries from merchants, all paint a different picture. A picture of an alternative world that nearly took root. A world where power came not from bloodlines or property, but from a vote. A world ruled not by kings, but by outlaws. The pirate republic is gone, but its echoes remain. In stories, in symbols, and in the simple, subversive idea that another world was possible even, if only for a moment. Section 7. Beyond the Caribbean. The global web of piracy. When people picture pirates, they think of the Caribbean, turquoise waters, palm-lined shores, and crumbling Spanish forts. But piracy wasn't confined to those narrow latitudes. It was a global phenomenon. From the icy banks of Newfoundland to the bustling markets of the Indian Ocean, pirates left their mark on every corner of maritime trade. And many of their most audacious feats occurred far from Nassau's decaying docks. In the early 18th century, maritime empires spanned the globe. The British, Dutch, Portuguese, French, and Spanish all jostled for influence. Their ships were the arteries of imperial power, carrying spices, silver, enslaved people, sugar, and silk. But on the fringes of these networks, pirates lurked like parasites. Some operated from Southeast Asia, where local sultans turned a blind eye in exchange for a cut. Others moved along the West African coast, attacking slave ships and occasionally freeing the captives. In the Indian Ocean, one name rose above the rest: Henry Every, also known as Long Ben. His career was short but legendary. In 1695, he captured the Gangassi Hawaii, a Mughal treasure ship en route to India from Mecca. It was loaded with gold, silver, and noble passengers. Every's men plundered it with brutal efficiency. The loot was immense. Modern estimates value it at over $100 million. But what followed was even more consequential. The Mughal emperor, furious at the attack on his subjects, threatened to expel the British East India Company from India entirely. London panicked. Every became the most wanted man on earth. The British issued the first international manhunt in history. Every vanished. Some say he retired in anonymity. Others claim he was betrayed and died in poverty. His ship was never found. Then there was Thomas Chew, who pioneered the pirate route from the Americas to the Indian Ocean. His success inspired others to follow, men like Every and William Kidd. This Red Sea Men network grew for a while, targeting rich Muslim and Hindu traders rather than European colonial vessels. But their attacks often caused diplomatic disasters, and eventually the British cracked down. In Madagascar, these pirates found a haven. The island was strategically perfect, isolated, rich in fresh water, and with a complex web of native kingdoms that could be exploited or traded with. Dozens of pirate settlements sprang up, some lasting years, others only weeks. The most famous of these was Libertalia, a supposed utopia founded by Captain James Misson. Libertalia was said to be an anti-authoritarian commune. Pirates of all races and creeds lived as equals. They shared wealth, made decisions by vote, and rejected nationalism. Slavery was abolished. The society was based on liberty and fraternity, or so the legend goes. Most historians believe Libertalia was fictional, or, at best, heavily romanticized. The only source is a dubious 18th century book that blends fact and fiction freely. But even as a myth, it reveals something profound. People wanted to believe that pirates could build a better world. Even more grounded were the pirate communities of Madagascar's northeast coast. The Bay of Antongel hosted dozens of pirate ships. These weren't lawless camps. They had customs, alliances with local rulers, and functioning trade. Pirates exchanged weapons and trinkets for rice, cattle, and women. Some even married into Malagasy families and settled permanently. Their children, mixed race and multilingual, formed a unique cultural bridge between the Atlantic and Indian Oceans. And then there was Qing Shi, the most successful pirate in recorded history, not in the Caribbean, but in China. In the early 19th century, Qing Shi commanded a fleet of over 300 ships and 20,000 sailors. She started as a prostitute in Canton, was captured by pirates, married their leader, and after his death took full control. Under her rule, the Red Flag Fleet terrorized the South China Sea. Qing Shi instituted a strict code. Rape or disobedience meant immediate execution. She brokered deals with coastal villages, set up smuggling networks, and defied both the Qing dynasty and the European powers. Eventually, the Chinese government offered her amnesty. She retired wealthy and respected, something almost unheard of for any pirate anywhere. Her story is often ignored in Western pirate histories, but it reveals how piracy wasn't just a Western or male-dominated affair. It was global, diverse, and often more complex than the rum-soaked clichés allow. Section 8. Pirate Culture, Life, Law, and Myth at Sea. The pirate lifestyle was brutal, but structured. On a ship, you lived and died by a code. These were not mindless criminals. Pirates developed elaborate social systems that rivaled any navy, unlike the rigid hierarchies of European ships, where a captain ruled with near-absolute authority. Pirate crews were semi-democratic. Captains were elected. Quartermasters held power to veto decisions. If a captain failed to deliver loot or treated the crew unfairly, he could be deposed by vote. The Articles of Agreement, or pirate codes, were binding. Each crew would draft their own common clauses, included equal shares of plunder, compensation for injuries, strict rules against theft or violence among crewmates, and designated penalties for breaking the rules. Discipline was harsh but transparent. The pirate code was more than logistics. It was ideology, a rejection of naval authoritarianism, a push for autonomy, a way for desperate men to build fairness in an unfair world. Wages were equal or close to it. A captain might earn 2 shares, the quartermaster 1.5, while ordinary sailors got 1. Compare this to the Royal Navy, where captains grew rich and crewmen starved. Pirates also offered insurance. Lose a limb, and you received extra gold. And then there was the question of race. Pirate ships were among the most racially integrated spaces in the 18th century. Black sailors, many former slaves, served not just as deckhands, but in leadership roles. Some became quartermasters. Others were known to have captained their own vessels. Pirates valued skill and loyalty over skin color. Freedom was a practical matter. A man who fought beside you deserved his share. This made pirate ships a rare sanctuary for runaway slaves, indentured servants, and indigenous outcasts. Empires saw them as criminals. The pirates saw them as crew. Sex and gender were more complicated. Female pirates were rare, but not unheard of. Anne Bonny and Mary Read dressed as men and fought in open combat. In some cases, they were more vicious than their male counterparts. Shipboard romances between men were common, especially during long voyages. Some pirates formed unofficial marriages, called mataletage, often involving shared property and mutual care. Religious belief was loose and often cynical. Some pirates were devout Christians. Others mocked priests and used crucifixes as drinking tools. Most crews included men from multiple faiths. Shipboard culture was built around superstition, custom, and a shared distrust of authority. Pirates had their own language. The romantic air of Hollywood is fictional, but sailors did use jargon, slang, and coded phrases. Flags sent messages. A red flag meant no quarter. A black flag offered surrender in exchange for mercy. Their songs and stories were a way to share trauma, boast, and preserve history. The oral culture of piracy was vast, most of it lost, but some of it living on in sea shanties and folk tales. In the end, pirate culture was a hybrid. Military discipline mixed with radical democracy. Brutality softened by loyalty. A floating commune powered by blood and gold. Section 9. The Final Rebellions and the Fall of the Golden Age. By the 1720s, the Golden Age of piracy was burning itself out. Empires had adapted. The British, Spanish, and Dutch navies had grown more aggressive and coordinated. Merchant ships began traveling in armed convoys. Privateering commissions dried up, replaced by peace treaties and punitive laws. The once friendly colonial governors who looked the other way, men like Woodes Rogers in the Bahamas, had become pirate hunters. And the pirates themselves had changed. The brotherhood had fractured. Greed, infighting, and betrayal tore through what little unity remained. The last great generation of pirates became symbols of both resistance and decay. Bartholomew Roberts, also known as Black Bart, was arguably the most successful pirate of the era. He captured over 400 ships between 1719 and 1722. Unlike many pirates, he was deeply disciplined. He forbade gambling and drunkenness on his ship. His dress was immaculate, and he often wore a red velvet coat into battle. He even attended church services aboard his vessel. But Roberts wasn't just a man of principles. He was a tactician and a showman. His ship flew a customized flag that showed him standing over a pair of skulls, labeled a Barbadian's head and a Martiniquean's head, referencing governors who had condemned pirates to death. He declared war on the slavers, the merchants, and the empire itself. His end came in 1722 at the Battle of Cape Lopez, off the coast of present-day Gabon. The British Navy had dispatched the warship HMS Swallow under Captain Challoner Ogle. Roberts was killed by bootshot. His crew, following his instructions, weighted his body and dropped it overboard to prevent it from being captured and displayed. With him died one of the last major freebooters of the Atlantic. The death of Roberts symbolized more than just the end of one man. It marked the final collapse of large-scale, organized piracy in the Atlantic. Naval patrols grew more relentless. Pirates were hunted, hanged, and displayed in gibbets as warnings. The British executed hundreds during the 1720s and 30s. The so-called pirate round, which had brought men like Henry Every to the Indian Ocean, was now heavily patrolled, but not all pirates went down with a saber in hand. Some accepted royal pardons. Others vanished into civilian life, changing their names and hiding their tattoos. A few took the king's shilling and became pirate hunters themselves. Even Blackbeard's former crewman, Israel Hands, lived out his final days in London after testifying in exchange for leniency. And yet, even in its final moments, piracy refused to die quietly. In the early 1720s, Nassau, once the pirate republic of the Bahamas, was in chaos. The British had appointed Woodes Rogers as governor, and he came with one goal: clean house. He offered pardons to pirates willing to surrender and the noose to those who didn't. Some accepted, seeing no other path. Others resisted, but their strength was fading. Rogers' forces, backed by British warships and loyalists, began systematically dismantling pirate infrastructure. Safe houses were destroyed, ships were seized, informants were paid. Nassau, once a haven for outlaws, became a fortress of law. Still, the resistance flickered. Some pirates fled to the coast of Carolina, to remote coves of Cuba, or even to West Africa. Others went deeper into the shadows, becoming smugglers or mercenaries. A few took to writing their memoirs, exaggerating their exploits to sell copies in London. The empire had won, but at great cost. Pirates had exposed the fragility of colonial control. They had disrupted the slave trade, ransacked merchant economies, and revealed the hypocrisy of European law. More than just criminals, they had become symbols, rebellious, independent, unyielding. Section 10. Legacy. The pirate's long shadow. Though the golden age of piracy ended nearly 3 centuries ago, its cultural impact never faded. If anything, it grew stronger over time. Today, pirates are everywhere. Their Halloween costumes, blockbuster characters, sports mascots, protest icons, and political metaphors. But the truth is more complicated. The romantic pirate, the dashing rogue who plunders the wicked and lives free, is largely fiction. Yet it's a fiction rooted in real-world resistance. Pirates weren't fighting for noble causes, but they were fighting against class inequality, against military tyranny, against the grind of imperialism. They were men and women who took control of their lives in a world that offered them nothing. In modern politics, the pirate has returned in strange ways. The Pirate Party in Europe, founded in Sweden, advocates for internet freedom, privacy, and anti-corruption. Their name is not accidental. They see the pirate as a rebel against monopolies and centralized control, this time digital, not maritime. In the Caribbean, the descendants of pirate communities still survive. Oral histories passed down in Jamaican fishing villages tell of mixed-race pirates who settled, married, and faded into the local population. In Madagascar, pirate ancestry is often claimed as a badge of defiance. Even the world of business and war has borrowed from pirates. Corporate raiders, hostile takeovers, guerrilla warfare, all echo the asymmetric tactics of pirates who struck from the shadows and disappeared before the empire could react. And then there's the media. Hollywood has reshaped pirates into heroes. Captain Jack Sparrow is absurd but magnetic. He pulls from a dozen real pirates, every Blackbeard, Calico Jack, and distills them into one eccentric myth. The Pirates of the Caribbean franchise brought piracy back into global pop culture, albeit sanitized and supernatural. But some creators have leaned into the darker side. In video games, Assassin's Creed 4, Black Flag paints a more nuanced portrait. The pirate Republic of Nassau is depicted not just as a party town, but a failed revolution. The characters struggle with morality, betrayal, and ideology. It's not just about treasure, it's about freedom. Documentaries, books, and podcasts now explore the real history, stripping away the eye patches and parrots. They show the brutal economics of the slave trade, the complexity of pirate governance, the role of women and people of color, the contradictions of men who fought oppression while dealing in human lives. In education, piracy has even become a lens for teaching global history. It cuts across continents, ideologies, and industries. From the sugar plantations of Jamaica to the markets of Calcutta, piracy reveals how interconnected the early modern world truly was. And yet, for all its facts, the myth remains powerful. Because deep down, people want to believe that somewhere, in some hidden cove, the flag still flies. That someone, somewhere, is still living free, not under a king or a boss or a contract, but by their own code. Section 11. The Pirate's Code in the Modern Age. The Pirate Code, as we understand it today, was more than a list of rules. It was a social contract, an agreement between outcasts to govern themselves in a world that had cast them out. This legacy has crept into surprising places. In open-source software communities, the idea of freely shared knowledge echoes pirate values. Hacktivists have co-opted the skull and crossbones. The Internet itself, born of decentralized networks, reflects the anti-authoritarian spirit of piracy. Information, like treasure, is meant to flow freely. Cryptocurrency communities, especially Bitcoin's early evangelists, framed their mission in pirate terms: decentralized, stateless, free from central banks. Some even adopted pirate aesthetics. And like the pirates of old, they found themselves targeted by state actors who viewed them as a threat to order. Then there are the modern sea pirates. In places like Somalia, piracy has returned, but under very different circumstances. These men are not romantic figures. They are desperate, often victims of war and poverty. But even here, echoes of the past remain. Attacks are organized, coordinated, and politically charged. They arise in lawless waters, where governments have failed. Yet few want to reckon with the fact that piracy never truly ended. It just changed shape. From the South China Sea to the Gulf of Guinea, piracy is still alive. Less myth, more economics. And so the question remains, who gets to be called a pirate? A corrupt politician who loots their country's wealth? A data broker who steals personal information? A rebel who hijacks a ship to feed their family? The line is thin, and often it depends on who writes the history. Section 12. The Ghosts Beneath the Waves, Myths, Lost Cultures, and the Jolly Roger's Afterlife. As the golden age of piracy crumbled and its legends sank beneath the tide, something unexpected happened. Pirates, though hunted, killed, or pardoned, refused to disappear. Their names echoed long after their bones were lost to the sea. Their ships, swallowed by coral and sand, became ruins that archaeologists still search for today. But more than the wreckage, it's the myths they left behind that continue to haunt us. Take the flags. The Jolly Roger is more than a skull and crossbones. It's a symbol of defiance, a universal sign of danger and nonconformity. But historically, it came in many forms. Some pirates used hourglasses to symbolize the shortness of life. Others displayed bleeding hearts or full skeletons holding spears. These weren't gimmicks, they were psychological warfare. A pirate flag wasn't just a warning, it was a test of nerve. Would you surrender or die slowly? In today's world, the Jolly Roger has been repurposed. It's flown by hacker groups, activist collectives, and even on military submarines after successful missions. The Royal Navy's own HMS Conqueror hoisted the skull and crossbones after sinking an Argentine ship during the Falklands War. The symbol has become unmoored from its past, no longer just piracy, but resistance. And what of the pirate havens themselves? Places like Nassau, Tortuga, and Port Royal weren't just stops on the map. They were laboratories for unplanned society. Cultures grew there that had no direct comparison. Freed slaves, escaped convicts, shipwrecked sailors, and rebellious officers all mingled in tight quarters. They built their own economies, languages, and laws. Historians now believe that some of these micro-societies were far more progressive than the European capitals that tried to destroy them. In Madagascar, oral histories point to the legendary pirate settlement of Libertalia. No physical evidence confirms it ever existed, but the story is persistent. A utopia founded by pirates who rejected kings, racism, and religion. A community built on equality and self-governance. Maybe it was a fantasy. Maybe it was real for a moment, then buried by time. But even if it was fiction, it told a truth about what people longed for in a brutal age. Other legends persist too. The lost treasure of Captain Kidd, the cursed gold of Blackbeard, secret maps burned into leather or carved into bone. These are the kinds of stories that historians scoff at, but they continue to inspire books, films, and excavations. Treasure hunters still search for the Flor do Mar, a Portuguese ship loaded with loot from Malacca, lost in 1511. It was never a pirate vessel, but its story has been pulled into the same gravitational field. The hunt, the danger, the myth. Modern archaeology has begun uncovering the real remnants. At sites like Blackbeard's Queen Anne's Revenge, divers have found weapons, tools, coins, and even medical equipment. One surgeon's kit included forceps, a urethral syringe, and a hand-powered drill. Evidence that pirates tried to care for their own fractors. Another wreck off the coast of Cape Cod revealed pistols wrapped in cloth, preserved in sediment. Each artifact tells a quieter story. These weren't ghosts, they were people. Still, the ghosts won't leave us. In folklore, the pirate is often an undead figure, the cursed captain doomed to wander the seas, the sailor who betrayed a pact with the devil. These stories can be found from Cornwall to the Caribbean. In Jamaica, tales of duppies, restless spirits, include drowned buccaneers seeking revenge. In Ireland, some believe pirate treasure is guarded by banshees. Even in modern urban legends, pirates show up as eerie figures on stormy nights, seen by lone fishermen and quickly forgotten by the next morning. The blending of fact and fiction is not accidental. It is, in many ways, the pirates' greatest legacy. They mastered their own mythology. Unlike the lords and kings, who had chroniclers and scribes, pirates had ballads and tavern tales. Their names were whispered across port towns, embroidered into tattoos, and passed on by drunk sailors to wide-eyed children. They became what the world needed them to be: villains, heroes, symbols, warnings. But their real triumph was existential. Pirates rejected the script they were given. In an era where birth defined destiny, they rewrote the rules. A former slave could become a pirate captain. A teenage girl could masquerade as a man and take command of a ship. A penniless sailor could challenge an empire. Their stories, when stripped of legend, reveal a deeper, harsher truth. They were murderers and liberators, opportunists and visionaries. They disrupted trade but exposed injustice. They were savage and democratic. Their world was full of contradiction, and that contradiction is precisely why we remain fascinated. In the end, maybe the point isn't whether pirates were good or bad. Maybe it's that they were something else entirely. A third option in a binary world, not crown or colony, not master or slave, but free in the narrowest sense, for the briefest moment, and that freedom cost everything. Somewhere out there, beneath layers of coral and time, the remnants of that age still rest. Cannons buried in sand, swords rusted to bone, gold melted into the ocean floor. But the real treasure of piracy isn't metal or maps, it's the story. The story of what happens when people refuse the world as it is. When they choose exile over obedience. When they sail into the storm because the shore holds nothing but chains. This was not a golden age in any romantic sense. It was brutal, short, and stained in blood. But it was a moment when the powerless punched back, when the forgotten carved their names into the hulls of empire. And even if the sea swallowed them, history didn't. The pirate isn't just a figure of the past, it's an idea. A dangerous, unruly, seductive idea. And ideas can't be drowned. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe for more content. Leave a comment telling us which side of history you'd like us to explore next.